Welcome to Sport Media and Tech. I'm Keel Blake. On this episode, Mark Hotchkin and I spend time with Jason Siegel, President and CEO of the Greater Orlando Sports Commission, and Joe Bertoletti, Senior Associate Director of Sport Tourism for the City of Surprise, Arizona. We discuss the economic impact of sport tourists and how events help build their region's identities.
A, thanks for having me, and B, pleasure to be with y'all this morning. I had a really interesting path. I went to school pre-med. I switched into the business school after I realized that there were going to be too many organic chemistry classes at 7 a.m. and just had a more interest in going into finance and business. So I switched over. And our school did not offer internships. This is 1987. But I managed to convince our careers and development folks that they should let me do an internship with the local American Hockey League franchise. It was the Hartford Whalers minor league team. I convinced them that they should let me work for them for credit. And it was a solid 16, 16 credits that I did pretty well. So that helped with the GPA. But I wound up working for a minor league franchise and kind of went from there. The franchise switched to the New York Rangers affiliation. So I worked with the folks at MSG for some time and then bounced around Dallas and Phoenix and wound up with the group that ran the ECHL, the East Coast Hockey League, for the NHL, and then found my footing with New Jersey Devils. Within the first little bit of time that I was with the Devils, we were part of the Yankees and Nets, so that was pretty exciting. My bosses were Lou Lamoriello and Mr. Steinbrenner and Randy Levine and Lon Trost and all those folks at the Yankees, and of course Rod Thorne and so many other good people at the Nets, so that was exciting. And then made my way to Orlando by purchasing with my college roommate a minor league hockey franchise. We brought the Orlando Solar Bears back to Orlando, and we actually sold them to the Orlando Magic, and I wound up falling into this great opportunity and able to keep my family here in Orlando, and I'm here in town over 10 years now.
And I got my start, started to go to school at Arizona State and wanted to be a sports agent. At least I thought I did. And I started working for the athletic department as a volunteer. I just raised my hand and said, I'd love to learn what you guys do. And after 4 years of working in many different areas, whether it was with the athletic director on game days or with a specific team during the season, I learned that there was a business outside of just being a sports agent in the line of sports. So that led me to my first job, which I was hired by one of the deputy athletic directors who became the athletic director at Drake University. So I went to work in Des Moines, Iowa for a period of time, got to learn a little bit about the smaller collegiate athletics administration experience. Then I was recruited to go work for the University of California, Berkeley in their athletic department and fundraising. So it was a friend of the athletic director at Drake. So I've been lucky throughout my career that each stop I've gotten to go to, I've been working for a mentor or a mentor's good friend. So at Cal, we raised money for a stadium, learned a ton about building facilities and how much money and planning went into the facility business. And then from Cal, I went over into UCF and got to work in the Orlando area. Loved my time in Orlando. Got to learn about a young school with a spirit like no other. And then from UCF, I was able to go to work at Maryland. And for me, my Maryland experience was truly transformational because we changed a lot at a school with a lot of tradition. And so we went from a school that was in the ACC to a school that was in the Big Ten. We had two new coaches in our two high profile sports, both basketball and football. And we basically changed our brand at the same time. We had just worked with Under Armour to change all of our marks, our logos and things like that. So for the alums and fans of Maryland, we basically changed everything on them in the period of 3 years. So it was really good change and change that's, benefited the school and the alums even to this day. But it's a lot when you're invested in a university and you know everything that you know and love, and things that have created unbelievable moments for you and your family have changed overnight. And then I was lucky enough, the deputy athletic director at Maryland became the athletic director at Holy Cross. He took me with him to help revitalize that campus. We built a $105 million project there to expand and add some facilities in the athletic department. And then finally, I was recruited back by one of my original who I interned for at the Anaheim Angels. Was one of the people working for the Kansas City Royals, and he connected me to the position here in Phoenix, kind of bringing me home. But also at the same time, I was able to learn a new side of the business with tourism, but really integrate the Major League Baseball component to it. So got to come back home and have been really loving the sports tourism side of things ever since.
Yeah, those are great. The topic of today's show is sports tourism, as you mentioned, Joe. And I guess a good place to start with is what exactly is sports tourism? How do you define it? What goes into it? And how does it, impact your local areas?
Well, I think, Mark, we've got an interesting model here in Orlando. We're probably one of the last regional sports commissions in the country. As just by example, probably if you go back 10 years ago, there were 100 sports commissions in the United States. There's over 600 now. If you look at the state of Florida, not that long ago, we had 25 sports commissions. We're coming up on about 40. So what's happening is counties, local municipalities have figured out that if they can raise a bed tax or some other way of raising some dollars that they can use to put against recruiting opportunities and incentivizing event organizers to come to their community, what we're finding is, cornfields have been renovated across the country. We're seeing that areas of, that maybe were mixed use that are now being converted into youth sports space. So because of that, you've got more competition and a lot more interest in doing business in this space, not to mention the number of event organizers has grown by leaps and bounds from when, truly youth travel sports evolved 25 years ago and went from $1 billion business to now being a $20 billion business. So here in Orlando, we represent our funding partners and of course the venues within those footprints in Osceola, Orange, Lake, and Seminole counties, the city of Orlando, and of course work on behalf of a number of opportunities for the state of Florida. So we find ourselves in like I said, a unique situation. We have over 35 venues that we bid on behalf of. That takes a lot of collaboration, an awful lot of folks that need to be educated on the process. We're very lucky in that, we're a top tourism community. We had 76 million visitors a couple years ago. We put 50 million people through our airport. We have 125,000 hotel rooms. So leadership, elected officials, our C-level folks in our community, they speak the language. So when we're talking about average daily rates and return on investment for economic impact, and we talk about a lot of the catchphrases within our industry, most of the folks that we're working with, they're familiar with what we're talking about, and they value what sports tourism and the impact it can bring into the community. Of course, driving impact and also driving money back into the bucket where those incentives come from, and of course, collecting sales tax on top of that. So we're very fortunate in that, we've got a community that speaks the language, and it's very helpful, especially with big marquee opportunities. And maybe we'll talk about it a little later, but I think, a World Cup bid, which is about a $800 million to $1 billion piece of business for our community, it takes a village, and it certainly is helpful that we have these wonderful relationships, not just locally, but regionally.
And I think, from my perspective, Jason hit everything, perfectly, but our model is a little bit different because we are the municipality that figured out eventually that tourism was going to be a driver for our community, especially when it comes to taxes. And so our community put the cart before the horse, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but we built a bunch of facilities in the early 2000s to attract sports to our community. And then midway through, 2015, our community leadership was like, we have these great facilities, we use them, our community benefits from them, our residents benefit from them, but can't we do more? And so that's how our department evolves. And the state of Arizona, tourism is the #1 export that we have in our state. And so that brings in the most money to the state of Arizona. And so each of the cities within Maricopa County, which is, where the city of Phoenix is, have decided and understand that, the more people that we have coming into our community, the less tax burden that there would be on the city and on its residents. For example, last year, tourism was able to help each resident in Maricopa County take $1,200 off their taxes. So when residents and folks start to see these numbers, they want more of a local initiative in their community. So thus, that's how our department was born. So our jobs are to fill the facilities within our city with different sports tourism opportunities. Like Jason said, there's many different event owners in the space now looking to do different things. We're lucky our major tenant is 2 Major League Baseball teams in spring training. So we're able to utilize that to bring in a significant amount of tourists into our community. But then what happens with those facilities that they're using the other 9 months of the year? And so our job is to bring in, whether it's amateur, professional, collegiate events into the community that are going to bring, people utilizing our hotels, visiting our restaurants, visiting our retail shops, and generating that tax revenue outside of the venue. But the city's interest is also to rent the venue. So for us, we're somewhat double dipping in the sense that we're taking a rental fee, or we have a revenue share between us and the event. And then we're also pushing them into our hotels, into our community to make that additional tax revenue that's going to help benefit the general fund for the city at the end of the day.
You both have shared really good reasons on why sports tourism, but who has a vested interest in funding or supporting your organization, and what are the governing structures? It sounds like they might be a little different.
There's a couple of different models, and we have, as I mentioned, a unique one in that we're more of a regional entity. But I think there's 2 different structures, maybe even 3, for a traditional sports commission. You can be embedded in the CVB, you could stand on your own, or you could be a government agency. And in our particular case, we're a standalone private nonprofit. About 60% of our funding comes from our funding partners, municipal funding partners, the counties that I mentioned, 4 counties, City of Orlando, State of Florida. So we see funding there, but the other 40% is private dollars that we raise, not necessarily through membership, although there are membership organizations out there. We expanded our board. We had 13 board members. We have 77 now. We had 4 corporate partners. We have 110, 115 corporate partners now. We were an official seller of attraction tickets, which obviously in our market is an opportunity for us to raise dollars. We also serve a lot of the events that come. So the events will come into town, and we'll be hired to provide services for those stakeholders and event managers. And then lastly, you've got sort of these unique opportunities that'll present themselves over time, where we can leverage our influence and access to assist, whether it be with brick and mortar projects and infrastructure and other types of either testimonial work that we'll do or research that we'll do on behalf of so many of the folks that we work with. So a good model for us. It works for us, especially in this, current environment where we did not want to continue to rely on government resource. It's important for us to have that private funding. In addition to being able to make discretionary decisions, it gives us a little bit more freedom, especially the competitive environment, the incredibly competitive environment we find ourselves in, where you could have somebody bidding on a piece of business, and the last thing we want that to become is part of open record requests by our competition. So we want to make sure that we provide ourselves
Joe's smiling while you're saying that.
Yeah, listen, there's no secret. If you work for a public entity and you don't have a way of protecting documents from open record request, I could just as easily, if I'm seeing, another community bidding on something, request that information and get a sense of what the other party is doing to win the business. So, it's interesting. You talk about competition, and I know Joe knows this. Two cycles ago, when the NCAA sent out about 500 RFPs for NCAA championships, there were 800 bids submitted. This last time around, there were over 3,000 bids submitted for those same 500 championships. So the competition level, and everybody is very savvy, and they're very educated on process. So it's great because it's a great landscape to work through, but at the same time, ultra competitive.
To give you a little bit of perspective on what Jason just said, one of the events that was in that bid cycle is an event that Jason and we and our team in Surprise kind of share back and forth, which is the NCAA Division II Tennis Championship. So one year they're usually in San Lando. The next year they're here in Surprise with us. So I mean, we hear from the committees. They tell us all this stuff, and they're like, "We really need your bids." And yet, who's probably on the other side of the table, who's bidding on it, who has the capacity to meet all their needs and expectations. And yet they're trying to up the ante every time. And I'm thinking back over the past 6 years, without the two facilities that we have, they're not hosting, they don't have an event place that they can host and have the confidence in it that they do within the two spaces in Orlando and Surprise. So that just is one example of groups across the country competing for these bids. And it is tough. I mean, for us, we are a government entity. So, I was on a call yesterday where we talked about what can we redact from an information request and what can't we, because one of our business partners, part of their business is material in their contract. And so those are the struggles that a public entity has that, a private entity doesn't have. We do work with a group like Jason's and Visit Phoenix that can do some of that are a private entity and can do some bidding on our behalf, especially if it's collective, because there's so many metropolitan smaller cities that are in the Phoenix metropolitan area for things like the Super Bowl and for the NCAA basketball tournament. We all work collectively together under that umbrella of what Jason does here in Phoenix. So it's definitely something that we have to then realize it's bigger than us and take that funding and be able to put it in a way where we can position ourselves as the whole Phoenix metropolitan area, which is, I think, is the great things that Jason does in Orlando. For us, we're driven, we get general fund money from the city of Surprise. So we do benefit that money comes in from taxes. And it helps us pay the bills, but we're not just paying the bills to bring in business. That's got to cover the facilities that we operate too. So that's our baseball stadium, the practice facilities for the Texas Rangers and the Kansas City Royals. We own our tennis facility at our complex here, and we also operate a large event space. So that covers the operations of it. And then we also get funding from the state of Arizona and the Arizona Office of Tourism, which helps us bid on events and promote ourselves as a destination. And then we also receive dollars from an additional bed tax that we have, probably similar to what other cities have. It's about 4.62% that we put into a tourism fund for every time that you're staying in a hotel here in the city of Surprise. And also there's a tax on Airbnbs and vacation rentals that we also see come in. So that's how our department is funded. We also sell sponsorships. We also sell memberships. We have a visitor's guide that we collect money on. So we have a bunch of different avenues that we utilize to supplement the government funding, so that when we need to have additional dollars for a specific bid or a partner, we always have access to it.
One of the things that kind of strikes me listening to what you're talking about is the depth or the breadth of different kinds of sporting organizations that you work with and try to attract to your areas. Everything from, you mentioned super high profile things like Super Bowls, international events like World Cup. But I'm assuming this goes all the way down through college sports and then to amateur sports, youth sports. Would love to hear a little bit more about maybe some of the details or differences or similarities that go into working with that varied of a constituency.
Yeah, no, Mark, it's a great question. It's sort of core to the business that Joe and I do. I think you can break it into 6 buckets. NCA is on a fairly regular cycle. So every 4 years we have an opportunity to get in there. Obviously there's conference championships and here with UCF and Stetson and the number of colleges that we have in our community. We have an opportunity to do some ancillary work over and above. UCF just brought the Hula Bowl in. That's completely outside of the spectrum, but NCAA is one. You mentioned amateur sports. That's probably a solid 65% of our business. Goes without saying to have an ESPN Wide World of Sports in our backyard and so many other good facilities. We're able to handle some large youth tournaments. Esports is becoming a big deal. It really feels like youth travel sports did 20 years ago, billion-dollar business. The screen time, I have 4 children and 2 of them, the middle boys are, they're going to become professional at Fortnite and Madden and a couple other things with the amount of time. I was laughing with my wife. We looked at their screen time and they have full-time jobs. Apparently Fortnite is one of them. So esports obviously is on the rise. That marquee business, for us lately, it's been a lot of international soccer. It's been Monster Jam World Finals, WrestleMania. We have such a good relationship with the folks at WWE. And of course, the NCAA big business with tennis that Joe mentioned and March Madness basketball. And then the last 2 areas, national government, the USOC, Olympic and Paralympic Committee work that we do in Colorado Springs, and now they've spread out all over the country. But those governing body of sport work, especially tied to we're just coming through the Japan Olympics. We anticipate a lot of opportunity. Pre-Paris in 24 with those Summer Olympics. And of course, pre-Los Angeles in 28, that's going to be a big opportunity for the United States here, especially for us, Summer Olympics, we, in Orlando and certainly probably in Phoenix, not a lot of Winter Olympic sport activity, but, and then, the last category for us, which we're seeing, and I know we're going to talk about return on investment and calculating impact, but we probably see 2.5 to 3 times the amount of spending from international visitors. So we're focused heavily on work with the international folks, the IOC in Lausanne, Switzerland. So many great partners there to see if we can't bring some of these big tournaments, festivals, championships, open opportunities here to the state of Florida and work with our partners in Miami and Jacksonville and Tampa and see if we can't attract some of the large international opportunities. So 6 buckets for us. And the balance, candidly, is there is no balance. You are at a little bit of the mercy of the calendars and how much lead time that event organizers want to provide. There are some organizers, they give you 6 weeks to fill out an RFP and a bid submission. And World Cup right now looks like it's going to be a 5-year bid cycle. We'll have been working on this for 5 full years. So, and there's plenty in between. So you're truly, COVID has thrown a wrench in that, of course, because many of the cycles have changed, although it's given event organizers an opportunity to rethink and reimagine the way they do their business. But, sometimes it's a fire drill, and sometimes you got years to work it out.
Yeah, it's been amazing as we started our department in more of a focus on tourism, that there is so many different areas and buckets that you're focusing on. It's been quite a bit overwhelming for us to explain to our political group that wants to know, why can't we bring in things tomorrow? It said, well, there's these things called bid cycles, and a lot of those bid cycles, like Jason mentioned, can be quick or they can be very, very long. And so sometimes the bid awards are going out so far in advance that if you want to make an impact in your community, it's going to be 5 years down the road. You could do a great year of business right now, and a lot of that might not show up in the next 5 years. So explaining what that cycle looks like has been really important to us, and being able to show some of the payoffs from when we first started 4 years ago to now and what we've been able to bring in. I think for us, a large share of our business is Major League Baseball. So spring training is that's the holy grail for us. So we focus a lot on spring training, but then there's quite a bit that goes on at our facilities that brings people to Surprise that's around Major League Baseball. So you have our traditional spring training, then we go into this area of extended spring training where it's still a lot of minor league baseball that's good quality, that people are staying longer in our destination to see that part of it. Then it starts to get hot in Phoenix. So sometimes it's hard to bring in your traditional visitor to come because it's 105, 110 degrees every day. We've made a niche for ourselves in amateur baseball, and that's our bread and butter in the summer months. So from May until August, amateur baseball is bringing in 100 to 300 teams into our city every weekend, and they're filling our hotels, filling our restaurants. They're the ones spending money in our community. So we've made long-term partnerships and long-term agreements with a lot of the major operators and event operators within that space. So, Perfect Game for us and USA Baseball and Wilson Baseball are huge partners of ours, where they're not only using just our facility, they're using our facility, which has 15 different Major League Baseball fields, and they're partnering with another facility that's about 15 minutes from us and using the same fields for that same tournament. So we're working together with that other destination to keep those room nights in our area, but also keep those teams in our space. So that's been a big focal point of us when we can't have the traditional sports tourism going on. And then we focus on a lot of what Jason talked about. Esports is huge. We're working with a couple of different traveling esports groups to set up camp within our stadium, but also we're working with other groups to have a constant esports influx in convention centers. Our partner, the Texas Rangers, they own an esports team, so we've kind of tapped into them to see what we can do to bring some of that to Phoenix and be another partner in that development landscape. But then we also host the Arizona Fall League for baseball. So back to the Major League Baseball being our big component to our facilities, and they're here for a month and a half. And then we go into a developmental league. So there's constantly baseball tourism, but we look to supplement around that and utilize that to just be a catalyst to the other things going on. We have made some partnerships not only with the NCAA, but to go into the college space. We've looked to make ourselves a great destination for neutral site tournaments. So the first 2 weekends of baseball, we're hosting 8 to 12 teams here at our facility to kick off the college baseball season. So, we have a long-term agreement with Oregon State University, who's been a national champion in 2016, and they bring and travel quite a bit. For us, that was the big component, getting a tenant partner that was going to bring a lot of travel. So for us, when we're looking to build these neutral site tournaments, it's not just let's get a tournament here, let's get the right teams here competitively, but also from a travel perspective so that it does both. Our number 3 market that comes into our state outside of Kansas City and Texas because of the Major League Baseball teams is the state of Oregon. So, and we can solely track that back to those baseball tournaments. So again, with whatever operations and facilities that you have or opportunities, we look to take advantage of some long-term partnerships to be able to use those.
It's very clear that each of your organizations are enhancing the regional identity of the areas. I recently read that bringing sports events can actually help highlight health and nutrition in a community, or that sports tourists on average spend 2 to 4 times the amount of money than an average tourist because of longer stays or larger groups. So the question is, how do you dial in and measure that from an ROI perspective? What are the numbers and metrics that your organizations use to show how you're enhancing the region?
Yeah, so to get in the weeds, which will actually shed a little bit of light, we're focused on average daily spending. So it sort of starts right there. So for us, you're evaluating the value of a in-state, in-region attendee, in-state, out-of-region attendee, out-of-state attendee, and then, of course, an international visitor. So we have, and of course, adult and child goes into that mix as well. I think that it's safe to say that if you're coming to Orlando for a trade show or a convention, you're probably going to spend almost twice as much as you would if you were coming for a youth sports tournament. One individual to a hotel room, maybe you're going to have dinner at a steakhouse. You're going to have a different experience, and you're going to spend a different amount of money if you're coming through your company who's paying the freight, and then maybe a family who's coming in for a softball or baseball tournament. Obviously, the amount of bed tax that's drawn from that attendee, and then the sales tax in addition to that, starts to play the role in how much money is collected by the community, and then ultimately how those funds are divided into marketing the destination, advertising for the destination, incentives to bring big events into your community, and so on. So it all starts with that average daily spend. And in our situation here, when you're looking at 76 million visitors in a fiscal year, for us, that can drive north of $275 to $300 million in bed tax, then is divided up into the community to continue to enhance and invest back in future years. And I know Joe mentioned it. I mean, we're looking at business. It's almost like the game of Tetris. I mean, the blocks just keep falling, and you've got to find a place to put all those blocks as they're falling. We're looking at business through 2031. I know our convention center is booking out through 2040. So all of these calculations are really important when you're weighing and measuring, well, do I take this business and put it in this location? We've got, second, third largest convention center in the country. If their space is not available, can we pivot and use convention space with so many of our hotels that have, Las Vegas, Chicago, there's so many cities that have done such a great job in that convention space. No different in sports. So it's a matter of, venues, return on investment. We're going to spend X. We want to measure, probably 3 things. We want to measure the economic impact that it's going to drive to our community. We want to market, we want to see what the eyeballs are going to be. Certainly if there's an event like World Cup, which is going to be broadcast to more than half the world's population, 3.5 to 3.8 billion viewers when the World Cup was in Russia. And then lastly, for the enjoyment of the residents that are here in our community, because ultimately 20, 30, 40% of the folks that are going to attend these events are going to be from our community, and they want the great thing about living in Orlando is so many great options as we bring in just this huge portfolio of events into our community. So really important that everybody understands those numbers, and what's important ultimately, those relationships with our airport and hoteliers and restaurateurs come into play. And then I'll end with this, because you talked about a community being versatile and what these events can do for the community. And it's not always just about that, because I'll give you 3 examples. We're looking forward to, we're going to host the Special Olympics USA Games. Could be one of the largest humanitarian efforts in our state's history, with over 5,000 Olympians coming into our community from across the country and some of the surrounding islands down here in Florida, with all of those athletes taking part in that wonderful event. We have Warrior Games coming this fall, so of course being able to celebrate the folks that have done such incredible work and who have defended and served our country. And then lastly, another interesting piece is when we're doing our World Cup bid, those folks are asking questions about human rights, human trafficking, LGBTQIA+ rights in your community, sustainability, inclusion. There are a lot of other conversations that are happening in 2021 that weren't happening 20 years ago. So a little bit of a broader response to your question, but I think it just shows the breadth of how many conversations we're having on so many different types of metrics and points that event organizers are evaluating our markets and our ability to host.
And I'm just going to add a few things, because what Jason's doing is exactly what we're looking at. That average daily spend for us is exactly the metric that we point to, which converts for us in our community into taxes. So what's that average daily spend, and then what's the tax revenue that's come into the city from that? We all look at the rest of it. We look at the average daily rate. The economic impact is what we use to justify why we're spending money on bringing an event into our community. But that average daily spend is really a key metric for us. But to give perspective on what tourism can do to enhance the regional identity, just think about this. The city of Surprise, where I'm at, with its population in 20 years ago, before spring training started, was 30,848 people. Today in our community, and as of the most recent census, we're at 149,558. So sports has been the catalyst to bring those people to our community, and we know that. We have many different surveys and things. What brought you to Surprise? We see that 20% of people were first introduced to Surprise before buying a home through coming to a spring training game. We have another 10% that was introduced through their kids participating in an amateur youth sporting event. So we're seeing 30% of our future residents coming directly from tourism activities that we in sports are doing. And so for us, that's not just that one-time tax revenue that they're putting into the community. That's long-term tax revenue. So we look at sports as a way to be a gateway into our community, so that whether you're buying a second home, whether you're moving, you're going to think of the city and say, wow, this was such a great experience. And for us, when we're looking at these things, Jason was talking about, the residential experience. We have to have buy-in from our residents to be able to do a lot of the things that we do. So making sure that some of the things that are coming into our community are something that they believe in, something that they want to be a part of, that's going to continue to keep everyone in our community, the politicians, the leadership, the residents happy, so that we can continue to expand our footprint and bring more things that are appealing, that they want to be a part of, into our community.
Thank you both so much for your time today. I want to take a moment before we wrap here to thank Joe and Jason. So Joe, you actually, when I was a student, gave me an opportunity for my first time role at first time full-time role at UCF Athletics. And you also opened up so many doors for other students while you were there. And now you teach at ASU. Jason, while I was at IOA, Insurance Office America, with John Rittenauer, we structured a deal with your Orlando Solar Bears and the team there. And you also opened up a tremendous amount of opportunities for students at UCF and at Rollins and at Full Sail, and continue to do that through your work. So I just want to point that out, and then also ask each of you as we wrap up, what is your advice for students? You both have worked with so many, and then we'll close out the podcast from there. So thank you.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I'm glad you asked the question, because it's been important to me. It's interesting. I'm old enough now where I have interns from a couple of years ago being hired by interns that were my interns 20 years ago. So you continue to sort of pay it forward. If you go back far enough, it's a fairly tight-knit group in this community. And I think that, if certainly you go back into the late 80s, early 90s, sports marketing, sports administration, the network business, certainly the way that we do business within social media and so many other platforms, both linear, non-linear, it's evolved 10, 20-fold. Opportunities, and when I started, very few women working in front offices. That has completely changed, and that's great for the industry. So I would say that the advice is very simple. When I look to hire, and these were values that were instilled, Lou Lamoriello, and working at the Devils for so many years, being around the Yankee organization, we look for three qualities. We look for competent, career-focused individuals, not job-focused, career-focused. They're invested, and they're certainly spending time both at the office, although that phrase has changed, hasn't it? At the office and away from the office, invested in their careers and growing, and evolving and developing a path. So competence, for sure, number one. Unparalleled work ethic. Ultimately, it's a competitive world. It's a competitive environment. There are a lot of folks, a lot more folks that are interested in being involved than certainly were when I started 30 plus years ago. So you have to have that self-motivation. You have to have really an ability to be a self-starter and be motivated and contribute. And then I think the last item for us when we hire, loyalty, and it's a two-way street. It's not just the expectation that I just hired you, you're loyal to me. I need to earn that respect, and I need to earn the opportunity to have that trust built up. But it's a loyalty ultimately to yourself, the way you present yourself, the way you go about your business, the way you conduct business on social media for your own platforms that you're promoting yourself on, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or so many others. So that loyalty to yourself, to make sure that you're presenting yourself in the best light, and to your coworkers. For us, we're so fortunate in sports that the team is organic sort of to what we're doing, especially if you work in team sports. I mean, you have this, a great environment around you. So it's easy to feel like you're part of the team, and then you kind of watch the wins and losses out on the pitch or the field or the ice surface or whatever it may be. So ultimately, you want to find folks that take a lot of pride in the way they present themselves and go about their business, and they're community minded, and they're good people, and the opportunity to have people that you want to work with on a day in and day out basis. For me, those are the things that we look for, and certainly every opportunity that we can either mentor or guide people through their journey, we're happy to do that, and we're so thrilled that we touch so many people, and have the opportunity to work with so many folks in an industry that I've loved from day one when I started as an intern back in 1987.
And just to kind of close that out, I've been fortunate enough to take and get a lot of great advice and guidance through my career in sports, and it's something that I'm passionate about. But my mentors were able to see that passion in me, and they were able to give me opportunities. And I love being able to do what Jason said and pass it on and grant others other opportunities and help students, find their passion in this and see them grow. I'm lucky enough that I have a couple of former interns that got to work for the Phoenix Suns and have been working for the Phoenix Suns, and for that to see their excitement, passion going into the playoff run this year, that was the highlight for me to see that happen. But I think to add on to Jason's attributes, there's only two other things that I would say is attitude is everything, and making sure that you always have a positive attitude, whether you're collecting surveys as a volunteer part in learning the industry, or whether you're working with the highest level CEO or COO of a company, that your attitude is always positive and that you're looking for ways to get better. And I think attitude can overcome so many other things in this industry that it's paramount to being successful. And then the last thing is communicating. I think a lot of times in our industry, we take communications for granted. It's even a department in some areas that communication is that important to our industry. But I think in sports, if you communicate what you're looking for, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, and ask questions, that's going to make you infinitely better. And being able to do that, whether it's in a large group or a one-on-one setting, communication is key to being successful in a lot of industries and taking the most from any opportunity you're afforded in sports. So to add on to Jason's critical things, communication and attitude will get you a long way in the sports industry.
And that's a wrap. Join us next episode where we talk about new industry problems and solutions with Charles Campisi of Engagement.